So, a TDX and TDS collab is basically on everyone's bucket list no matter which game you play. I personally feel that a TDX and TDS collab would help publicly end the TDX and TDS beef, even though John and Blow have publicly stated they are chill. People who aren't involved with the social media presences of these games are not aware of this. This video will be formatted differently from my other videos, being a story of how I think this awesome collaboration would unfold. This will then be followed by me explaining how I think this would work out gameplay-wise, then concluding with a Q&A on some questions I think people may have. Due to there being little to no lore in either game about a collaboration happening, this story is primarily a work of my imagination. That being said, I based it in each game's respective lore in order to ensure this video can be used to make this event actually happen. During the story, I will have the relative night/chapter for each game in the top left, as both TDS and TDX would have their own respective events. Each game will have 3 nights or chapters respectively. So, dear viewer, TDX or TDS fan, let me tell you a tale. Our story picks up in Night 1 of Tower Defense Simulator at Outpost 32. The Umbra has returned, and TDS is losing, badly. In her cosmic exile, she has been bolstering her strength for years, seeking nothing but revenge and conquest on TDS. The opening cutscene shows a panicked TDS fighting against the horde of the Umbra, defending for all their life. While TDS is fighting hard, they are clearly losing. The Umbra is much stronger than the last time they fought her. The camera pans to inside the Outpost 32 control room to the commander, Professor V, and the dispatcher talking. They were out of options, and they were losing, fast. Assistance from another realm would be needed. Professor V speaks up, stating she knew a realm that is quite similar to their own, a realm that prides on itself to ability to defend. TDX. The group is initially against asking for this help, having found the location of the Umbra herself. The group finally concedes to sending an envoy to TDX to ask for assistance as they couldn't take Umbra alone. The commander agrees to go to the world of the TDX. Meanwhile, the TDS forces stationed at Outpost 32 are given one directive: defend the portal while Professor V and the dispatcher open it up to TDX. The commander must reach the Global Defense Agency inside. The commander makes it through the portal to TDX. Professor V and the dispatcher announce to all the defending units that they're going to try to make their way to Umbra regardless, even if Commander doesn't make it back. They were still going to try and destroy Umbra, and go down fighting. The cutscene for TDX Chapter 1 opens up on the GDA base. A mysterious visitor had appeared in the lobby requesting to speak with the GDA's leader. Advisor and John move to meet this visitor. The visitor introduces himself as the commander of TDS and gives his plea for help. He explains what happened at Outpost 32 and who the Umbra is. John and Advisor agree to help out TDS, but before they could enter the return portal, an otherworldly force attacks the GDA base. The commander recognized them as agents of Umbra, and the GDA makes its first move against Umbra, a defense of their main base. During the gameplay, the commander gives exposition through dialogue, catching the player up to what happened in TDS Night 1 from the commander's perspective. As the agents of Umbra are felled, Commander briefs the GDA on what they just fought. Commander looks at John and almost recognizes him. They then head back through the portal and the GDA enters the world of TDS. We rejoin the world of TDS, where the Dispatcher and Professor V are marching towards Umbra's current location. Dispatcher and Professor V express doubts that the commander will return with reinforcements. Suddenly, an explosion cuts off the road ahead of them, and a mysterious enemy ambushes the TDS army. A giant robot flies overhead and slams down on the path, releasing a metallic screech. They steel themselves to fight this unknown foe. It is clear throughout this mode that these enemies are not familiar to Professor V and the Dispatcher, not matching any known Umbra visuals. That being said, they radiate the same dark, cryptic energy as her. These enemies almost seem possessed by her. As the giant cybernetic robot collapses to the ground, the TDS army begins to move out back towards Umbra. The camera then pans down to the corpse of the robot, with a small message engraved on its armor: property of Xenon. The cutscene opens to the GDA arriving through the portal, arriving in a desecrated Outpost 32. The once polar region is scarred by war. Flames and embers flutter through the air, and the once imposing TDS stronghold is now infested with Umbra's underlings. A voice calls out from the shadows of the fortress, telling these otherworldly foes to leave their domain, or be destroyed. The GDA refuses the request. A shattered and war-torn Penumbras emerges. So be it. The GDA skirmishes with Penumbra's and Umbra's forces amongst the war-torn Outpost 32, and the commander gives the player insight into both Penumbra's and Umbra. As Penumbra's is finished, he calls for reinforcements. He is dead, but more are on the way. The GDA finds a tape left behind by the dispatcher informing them of Umbra's location. The GDA departs Outpost 32 to find TDS and fight Umbra. All that remains is one final effort. We start off with the camera panning down on a cutscene with TDS in an all-out brawl against Umbra and her forces. However, just like at Outpost 32, they are losing badly. They are in a one last-ditch effort to finish off Umbra, however it is fruitless. Professor V and the dispatcher are losing hope that Umbra will fall. Umbra laughs at the TDS's futile effort, gloating in her pure strength. It was all for nothing. The world would fall after all. As the Umbra prepares to finish the job, a large blast hits her in the face, and from over a hill, the GDA arrives. The GDA had finally arrived to TDS's side. With no time to waste, the two groups unify against the Umbra to put her down for good. Together, they would prevail. The GDA and TDS work surprisingly well together, being able to fend off the once daunting hordes of Umbra and push them back. Umbra can't believe what she sees, as her sure victory is starting to slip from her very hands. She calls upon all her strength, and two armies, the TDS GDA army and the followers of Umbra, collide for one last time. Night 3 is the same for both games from each respective game's point of view. The leadership of each faction exchanges dialogue with one another while also providing insights into the Umbra. TDS and the GDA were winning, and as Umbra herself arrived on the battlefield, she met the same fate as all her troops. She begins to flake and fade out of reality. In the closing cutscene, we see the Umbra finally defeated, slain for good. After the battle, the leadership from both factions meets and agrees if a cataclysmic event of such grandeur were to ever occur again, for either one of them, they would be there for each other. The leadership exchange jokes and becomes quite good friends with one another. But of course, it was time for TDX to return home. The camera cuts to the GDA leaving through the portal back at Outpost 32. As they leave, Commander says something to Dispatcher about John, reminding him of an old ally that just outright disappeared one day. I swear I've met that guy before. So that's my little story about how I think a TDS and TDX collab would go down. Now that I've given you all a basic overview of how the story would go, let's talk about gameplay. It should be noted that a lot of my thoughts on gameplay are pretty broad topics. I won't be talking about anything super specific like wave structure, as that is 100% up to the developers. This section will be largely about general philosophies for each night. Night 1 should be designed to narratively introduce Umbra to the player in both games, both through story and gameplay. Night 1 should be relatively basic, having one path, a pretty beginner-friendly wave structure, especially on easier difficulties. TDS's Night 1 should play off of people's experience on Outpost 32 and previous events, albeit a bit more streamlined since it is just Night 1. TDX should introduce resistances and general enemy types within Umbra's army in Night 1 as well, saving the bigger bads for later modes. I designed Night 2 with the thought of introducing TDX players to TDS enemies via Penumbras and TDS players to TDX enemies through the Possessed Eradicator I mentioned in the story. Due to this being a collaboration for both games, I wanted a cultural exchange in terms of enemies to occur, and I think Night 2 does this pretty well. While I would have loved for TDX players to come across a core mode TDS boss, I elected for Penumbras as it fits the narrative better. That being said, I'm sure some standard TDS enemies could be worked into Night 2 somehow. The final night is probably my favorite idea I've had when designing this entire thing. Night 3 is the same for both games, as in canonically they are the same battle, even though it can be played on both games. I want a night to really show the two games teaming up, and I think this is the best way to do it. Given a few core game mechanics in TDS and TDX, like how tower HP, cliff towers, and line of sight exist, I wanted to provide Paradoxum and TDX with the ability to have their own takes on the same core mode. While the wave structure will be very similar in each game outside of specific enemy HP values for balancing reasons, the tower gameplay will be slightly different. As for making a TDS GDA army a reality in gameplay, I do have two possible solutions for this. Depending on which game you're playing, the other game's units should come out of spawn as path units that scale up in strength as waves go on to simulate upgrading. I think that this final map should be no path in order to facilitate the two armies clashing vibe I described in the story. Another idea is that TDS and TDX towers are in each opposite game, controlled by AI that auto-upgrade themselves to a relative level of that of the player's towers and how many waves it's been. Personally, I prefer the first option as thematically it's cooler and also would be way easier gameplay-wise as the developers wouldn't have to code entire AI towers and instead just make some units that spawn, but let me know what you guys think could happen for this final night. So now I just want to do a little Q&A because I think there are going to be a lot of questions on this video, and so I think I've got a few frequently asked ones that I'll answer for you guys. Why Umbra? So Umbra is an extremely recognizable TDS villain, but also one I think fits within TDX as the GDA has fought extraplanar demons before in the form of the Awakened Army. I didn't want to touch any of TDS's or TDX's current villains like Dr. Xenon or the Children of Exo, as those characters are tied to each game. Umbra is such a timeless enemy, and as such, my story can be used basically anytime down the road. TDS didn't win the 2022 Innovation Awards, so why would the Umbra come back? Umbra was only promised to return if they won. Just because they didn't win doesn't mean Umbra can't come back. Refer to my statement about Umbra being timeless, why I really think it should be Umbra to return for this event. You got something wrong about the TDS universe. While I did do a lot of research while making this video, I did not play the Hexscape event firsthand, and as such my research was limited to the TDS wiki and YouTube playthroughs. If I got something wrong about the TDS universe, please let me know. Do you plan on making more TDS videos? Yes, I am. I really got back into it, and I've been having an absolute blast playing it. If you have another question, please leave it in the comments and I'll gladly answer. These were just a few that I thought I would be getting. So, John and below, my DMs are open, let's make this happen. If any developers, leaders, or representatives of TDX or Paradoxum games are watching, I am more than willing to let the story and vague game design be used. That being said, I kindly ask you to reach out to me beforehand. Additionally, this collab under no circumstances should just be a skin collab with only skins and no actual content. John and below, you guys both make unreasonably cool games for this not to have some form of narrative, especially given TDS's Please Donate collab and John Roblox haven't openly stated a desire to collab. If you're new to my content, given this is my first video on TDS, or just enjoy my content in general, please subscribe as I have a ton more content coming I'm sure you'll like. Let's make this happen. Goodbye, and, as always, make stuff you're proud of.